Okay. And are we still interested in hearing the BornAlive executive order story? We gonna talk a little bit about being born alive? Are we gonna talk about that? I'm kind of ready to talk about it. You like to throw eggs at your local representatives? I cannot endorse acts that might be perceived as violence or uh, so you know what? As long as you're throwing eggs at your elected representatives in Minecraft, go for it, buddy. And let's see here. Go ahead. Sure, we can talk about this a little bit, because why not? Right? All right. Let's talk about this thing. Okay. So, Trump works to win Catholic voters on abortion issue. Basically, we're talking about the BornAlive executive order that Trump signed quite recently, a few days ago, and it's essentially an attempt. It's a bid to I guess, court the Catholic vote, the anti-abortion vote. And it's premised on the idea that essentially there are doctors who forsake their Hippocratic oath and do not treat children who are born alive. Despite that being kind of what doctors are duty bound to do and professionally bound to do, like that's their job, is keeping people alive. So this executive order was signed, and I was kind of like, okay, this seems kind of redundant because we already have laws in place, in fact, that do address this very issue. In fact, it is illegal for a doctor to just let a child die. That is in fact illegal to do. This is further clarified by the fact that the HHS Secretary Azar basically had to put out a statement that is like, yeah, essentially the order is just having us kind of reinforce to doctors and health companies that have anything to do with the well-being of children that yeah, you can't let babies die. Look at the bullet points here. Ensuring that individuals responsible for federally funded programs and activities are aware of the obligations they have under the law, including when infants are born prematurely or with disabilities. Ensuring that individuals responsible for federally funded programs and activities are aware that they may not unlawfully discourage patients from seeking medical treatment for their infant child solely because of their infant child's disability. Investigating complaints and taking any appropriate enforcement action against individuals or entities found through investigations to have violated federal law, and clarifying the process by which parents and hospital staff may submit such complaints. Prioritizing the allocation of HHS discretionary grant funding and National Institutes of Health research dollars for programs and activities conducting research to develop treatments that may improve survival, especially survival without impairment, of infants born alive, including premature infants or infants with disabilities who have an emergency medical condition in need of stabilizing treatment. Prioritizing, consistent with the law, HHS discretionary grant funding to programs and activities, including hospitals, that provide training to medical personnel regarding the provision of life-saving medical treatment to all children born alive, including premature infants or infants with disabilities who have a medical condition in need of stabilizing treatment. And when I was kind of confused about this, I kind of started talking with some of my more conservative friends, and I'm like, okay, but all these things are things we pretty much already do. Like, if you went to the cops and said, or like the FBI, and you're like, hey, this place, I have credible evidence that they're killing babies. Like babies who are, like, born alive, they're just letting them die. I'm pretty sure that would be considered murder. I'm pretty sure that's already illegal. But the issue here is one of my conservative friends brought up the case of this woman named Melissa Ohden, abortion survivor. She has a book, You Carried Me, and I just kind of wanted to talk about this a little bit because her book basically posits that abortion is bad because, like, she survived her aborting attempt, and, like, she has grown up into a fully, like, adult woman, and, like, she's living her best life, and you know what? Good for her. And, like, I understand why an experience like that would cause her to kind of embrace spirituality, in her case, Christianity. And you know what? Good for her. The problem here is that a lot of people use her story, and indeed, she uses her own story to advocate against abortion. And as if abortion is, you know, this evil practice where doctors are killing live infants all the time, and, like, you know, it's just a sick practice. And, like, that's kind of what the Born Alive executive order plays into, that idea or conception of abortion. But there's some little elements of her story. So basically, the story of Melissa Ohden goes that her mother got pregnant, as, you know, people who have babies do. And there it is. She got pregnant, as people who have babies do. And it was pretty weird because her grandmother was super not okay with her daughter being pregnant. So her grandmother, in fact, happened to be a very influential nurse at a local institution who had influence over the abortionist at that particular facility. And so her grandmother pressured her into getting an abortion against her will. And the way the story is painted in, like, a lot of retellings is that, like, these evil nurses and doctors forced her to have this abortion, and, like, were holding her down, and, like, you know, being evil doctors and, like, forsaking their oaths or whatever. When actually the reality of the situation is much closer to, actually, none of the nurses or doctors who worked on her knew that she was there against her will. They thought it was a fully consensual abortion. And because of her grandmother's connections within the hospital and with the abortionist, they bypassed a lot of the safety procedures and measures that would, you know, determine whether or not someone was being coerced into having an abortion, or, you know, making sure that everything was on the up and up and safe during the abortion. And basically, they used this now very outdated method because this occurred back in the 70s. They used this abortive method with saline solution that is no longer used. It was essentially considered a more dangerous procedure, and there are less invasive ways of actually doing abortions now. So, like, when people mention this story, they'll talk about, like, oh, she was left in toxic chemicals and liquid, and it's like, well, okay, that doesn't happen anymore. It's not, like, a common practice at all. Like, even within, like, the last decade, like, something like 0.01% of abortions are done this way anymore. But, okay, ignoring that part, so the abortive materials were taken from her mom and were basically to be disposed of quietly. And a passing nurse happened to hear some baby crying from this aborted material, and this Melissa Ohden happened to survive, which is pretty incredible. Like, that's a legitimately incredible story. And so the nurse, because she's a good nurse and, like, bound by oath and law to help people, scooped her up and saved her life, and along with the other doctors at the hospital, which is great. But it's also an example of how doctors aren't out to, like, kill newborn babies. Like, that's not what doctors are out to do. In fact, for the record, there are only, in the entire history of that procedure, there are only 2 live births that have ever occurred and been recorded, and Melissa Ohden's is one of them. So, like, it's incredible that she's alive at all, and honestly, like, good for her, I guess. But most babies are not viable when they are aborted that way. And it's only with the hard work of her doctors and the nurses at that hospital that saved her life. All of this to say that this executive order, the BornAlive executive order, is really A, redundant, and B, just trying to play into this idea that there are doctors out there who are trying to kill babies. It's just not the case. And I also don't want to, like, vilify Melissa Ohden, because I'm sure I would feel a certain way if, like, I learned as a teenager that my mom, my biological mom, had tried to, like, abort me. I wouldn't be happy with abortion if I had learned that either. But also, like, we have to recognize that this is the fringiest of fringe cases. Like, when you're talking about two live births from this procedure ever, it's not like her doctors would have been looking for that or been expecting that, right? And I think we need to just kind of recognize that that is an incredibly small statistic number, and that A, be thankful that Melissa Ohden managed to survive, and B, also recognize that a lot of people can't afford babies, can't make do with taking care of a life, or can't afford physically to give birth with their bodies. There are a lot of reasons, good reasons, why abortions occurred, and I don't think that using these very extreme fringe cases where viable children were born out of abortions to discredit the entire practice, I think that's frankly silly. Because, hey, abortion should be legal, and that's where I'm gonna end this segment, I guess. Abortion should be legal, and it's really shitty that Trump is just using it as, like, a political football to grandstand around, to, like, basically jingling it in front of conservatives like a bunch of shiny keys. So, yeah. Aren't most abortions also carried out way before that baby could ever survive outside the body? Yes, that is correct. Most abortions are carried out far, far, far before it is remotely possible for a baby to survive outside of the womb. And it's only in extremely rare cases where an abortion will occur when the child is viable. And usually that's because it presents some sort of threat to the mother's life, or because there needs to be like an emergency delivery for reasons to like benefit the child, so that doctors can like perform a surgery on the still developing fetus and try and help it reach maturity. Abortion is a woman's choice. They're the ones who are carrying that life to term. And they're the ones who should have the decision over that. And honestly, I think abortion's okay. Boom. End of issue. I don't think it's a problem, and I don't think we should waste as much time talking about it as we do, because it's basically from the beginning only been a political football. Have you ever thought about how it's so weird that abortion is like this politicized thing in the United States? I know I have. And it turns out it wasn't always that way. In fact, up until the mid 1900s, like around the 1960s, it wasn't until then that the Republicans developed the Southern strategy, which aimed to court racist white voters and also evangelical Christians, and that's how kind of those two factions got merged together to become kind of the GOP base. And they targeted those evangelical Christians by basically politicizing, working together with like a lot of the big Baptist and evangelical pastors of the time to politicize the idea of abortion that up until that point, evangelicals had largely been, as a voting bloc, non-existent. But the sudden politicization of abortion became the rallying cry that Republicans could use to create this voting base. And the racist white voters, they were just holdovers from the party swap, which basically had Republicans being the ones who were pushing for segregation. And once they were losing on that issue, they switched to abortion, and that's the way it's been ever since. And the racist whites, they just stuck with the party, because there was a lot of overlap between racist whites and evangelicals who really cared about abortion. And honestly, I think we just need to recognize that the history of this topic is rooted in that political action, and it is demonstrably rooted in that political action because you can find old video of political strategists from the time directly explaining how the Southern strategy worked, and like why they did what they did and how they did what they did. So I think the first step we need to collectively take is recognizing those historical roots, and then I think we can kind of see what why the current conversation is the way it is. And I think knowing the why allows us to move forward together with a little bit better understanding. So that's my take. Oh man, how are we feeling? Those were some heavy topics. Heavy topics. You can tell I'm getting tense. I need to do better at looking like I'm loose, because I start kind of like hunching up, like getting tensed up in my back. I need to do better at like just keeping loose, relaxed, keeping my good posture. How How are we doing, chat? Nice review. You know what? I wasn't gonna go into like the history of abortion, or the political history. Yes, politics will ruin your posture. I wasn't gonna go into that history, but I figured giving some of that background after talking about this story would help perhaps people approaching it from a different perspective understand where I'm coming from. Because I think once you accept that this topic has been politicized, it's much easier to understand your own biases. And I also think focusing on the history is a good rhetorical way to kind of soften the blow of basically just saying abortion is fine. Like, it's a fine practice, and I think that's a really hard thing for a lot of people to say. In fact, Big Joel recently had a really good video about this topic, about how it's hard to just say like abortion is okay, because we almost have this need to kind of soften that blow by like appealing to emotion and just being like, yeah, it's really sad when anyone has to get an abortion. And it's like, well, not necessarily. Like, I don't know. It's fine. It was fine prior to the 1960s. There weren't a ton of people mad about it. Whew. I am going to drink this water on stream. That's right, boys and girls, you're getting a wet stream.